Hello, Cleveland, and welcome back to another episode of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Jack McCurry. Anthony Jokey will not be with us on tonight's episode, but fear not, I brought on Jack Duffin once again. Jack, how's things going, man?
I'm doing good. It's always good to be back. Always enjoy chatting Brown. So, no, more than happy to jump on and have a chat with everything going on.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to talk always. The pod we haven't recorded for a few weeks. Me and Anthony took a little hiatus. We're hopefully going to get back into the swing of things, get back on track. Got the combine coming up, obviously free agency, the new league year. But we do have some Browns news to catch up on, definitely. Let's start off with what's gone on this week. The Browns have started to make some roster cuts, start to create a little more cap space than they already had. Jack, you wrote that great article for us at the Dogland a couple weeks ago. You're already nailing all the roster cuts. Demetrius Harris, TJ Carey, Eric Kush, and Adarius Taylor were all cut on, I think it was Monday. Those weren't surprises. All of Dorsey's guys that, were making a decent amount of money are all gone. We were able to free up cap space. We were able to save about $13.3 million, I think was their number. But the Browns are starting, and Andrew Berry are starting to kind of trim the fat that was, John Dorsey's quote unquote real football players.
Yeah, and to be fair, I was never the big fan of Dorsey from the start, but there were moves that made sense. You've got Adarius Taylor is a very athletic player. I was happy when we were linked. I was hoping it would be alongside Fells rather than getting rid of Fells and bringing him in, because I thought give as many sort of options. Having three tight ends you like would be a nice position to be in. Obviously it didn't go that way, but there was upside and potential. You had the Kush move. Kush had come off a solid year. So it made sense as that sort of move of why not give him a go. He was still relatively cheap. Who knows if it was part of his play, wider issues. No one really had a good year on the O-line last year. And the other player that was interesting was Carey. Carey came off a fantastic year the year he got signed. The contract was awful. And it was never going to last any longer than this. It was very much a 2-year deal. And he was getting cut more or less regardless of whatever happened this year. Darius Taylor, I'd never liked the deal. But with the other three, there was at least, you could see what he was doing. Carey was signed as a starter. Kush was signed as a starter because Zeitler was going. So it wasn't sort of wasteful depth signing. You could see what the idea was. It just didn't work.
Right. The thing with Carey, I go back to that. It's like a little chart that got leaked out, and I think it's deep. It was Deep Podesta and Saji Brown's plan, and the one thing was don't pay for depth. And when you're looking at TJ Carey, he is the third or fourth ranked corner on the Browns, but he was, I think, the top paid corner, and I think that was an issue. Yeah, he was pretty much the nickel. But when you already have a guy like Eric Murray who's going to be relatively cheaper and just as productive, that makes Carey expendable. And I'm sure he'll land somewhere. Already Demetrius Harris signed with the Chicago Bears. He's got that connection with Matt Nagy. I'm sure Kush will land somewhere. And Adarius Taylor, the one place that makes sense would be Washington if they need linebacker depth, because he played in that system under Ron Rivera and Steve Wilkes. So all those guys will definitely find new homes. But, when you think about it, if you don't have to pay for depth and you can get quality, cuts like the ones on Monday made complete sense.
Oh, yeah. They were part of the 7 that I thought were more or less guaranteed. The only one that I'm sort of not sure on is Burnett, because I just don't know the medical where that is. And that's something, unless you're behind the scenes, you just don't know. The other 2 that are coming, Kirksey's coming and Hubbard's coming. It wouldn't surprise me, Hubbard, if it doesn't happen until camp time, or even later than that. So there's a long way to go, but there is more in the pipeline.
Yeah, a lot of people were shocked that Chris Hubbard wasn't one of the first cuts. Like, it makes sense to wait either, like you said, at camp, or make him a post for June 1st cut, because then the dead cap number lowers. I mean, you cut him now, you have to eat a little bit more dead cap money, where you could just be patient and wait, and maybe somebody would come calling and offer up a trade for Hubbard. I mean, he was a decent lineman in Pittsburgh. I mean, he's at least a 6th or 7th offensive tackle. The salary is definitely an issue, but I mean, the Browns could hypothetically pull off a trade for him.
Yeah, and it's also important. You never want to go into draft or free agency or any situation like that where you have a desperate need. Because the minute you go into a draft and you go, we have to get a offensive tackle at number 10, we have to get this in the second round, you're in a bad spot. Whereas you can happily keep a player like Hubbard, and around camp time, you've got your 4-5 tackles, and then when someone else goes down another team, you can trade them off. And as well, if that number 10 pick gets injured in camp, what are your options? Are you suddenly going to get a street free agent and Kendall Lamb as your 2 tackles? Until you're forced to make a move, don't make a move. And with Kirksey, you're going to be forcing your hand with signing Joe Schobert. If you cut Kirksey and the next day you phone up Joe Schobert and go, let's get a deal done, suddenly he's like, well, I'm the only experienced linebacker on this team. My price just went up another $1 million. You don't ever go into a negotiation on the back foot. So keep hold of them, get deals done, and then if there's no hurry, move on after that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Schobert. He was on, I think it was Sirius XM over here in the States last week, and he said that, you know, they've had dialogue with Andrew Berry, which is good because there was no dialogue when Dorsey was the GM. You know, it's getting close to crunch time here. I would say hypothetically the combine is the deadline to get a deal done, because that's when the back channeling starts with free agency and everything. And, you know, Schobert along with Corey Littleton are like among the top linebackers available on the market. Jack, hypothetically, what would be an ideal contract for you? And I know I'm just throwing this to you right now, and you might not have any, you know, numbers to look off on, but what would be a good number for Schobert in terms of like per year average?
Yeah, so looking at over the cap, they'll reckon around 11 million a year. It wouldn't surprise me if it's 12, but somewhere I'd say in that 11 to 12 million a year range. I don't know what the market's like in terms of contract length, whether it's how many years that is. But for me, you've got 3 names and you have to go out and sign one of them. You've got Joe Schobert, you've got Corey Littleton, and you've got Blake Martinez. One of them will be a Brown next season, or we're going to be in trouble, because you need that at least one really experienced linebacker in the group that has performed to a decent level. And those are the 3 that are out there. Will they make it to free agency? Who knows? But they're the 3 to keep an eye on. One of them will be playing in orange and brown next year.
Do you think that would be like the Browns splash free agency signing, or do you think they can make multiple, like one of those linebackers and then maybe one of the safeties? Or yes, let's just go with the safeties because that seems to be the hot topic.
It all depends what you mean by splash and how big you're looking. The bigger you look and the bigger that contract is for, say, one particular player, the less likely you can go and do it in different rooms. So obviously you've got sort of a cheaper position like tight end. Safety is not that expensive. If you're going after Anthony Harris, you're looking top of the market there. Whereas you can get a Trey Boston that is going to be sort of a third off compared to Harris and playing at a really good level. And it's never a good idea to look at those tier 1 free agents. The best players you're going to get that produce most value is that tier 2, tier 3. So I think there's some solid names out there that you could come up with a good free agency class. You want to avoid that tier 1 as much as possible, because whichever position group you're in, you're rarely ever going to get value off that contract. And that's what it comes down to. It's understanding what is meant by when someone says value. If you sign a player to X amount, he has to perform better than that contract. So say a top pass rusher, whether you're Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack, Myles Garrett when he gets his deal, they're going to get a massive deal, an eye-watering amount of money. It's very hard for those players to ever produce value, because you're saying, right, you're paid like the defensive MVP of the year, You can't perform any higher than that. So it makes it really challenging. Whereas if you sign someone to a deal that's 10 million instead of 20 million, there's a lot of room in there to really provide value and overperform your deal.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about the tier one free agents, obviously pass rush would be in that realm that come in this offseason. Olivier Vernon, he's the highest paid Brown right now at 15.5 million. There's nothing guaranteed. The Browns could cut him, and that would open up all the cap space. And then you look at some of the guys that are available on the market, they're going to cost just as much as that more. And I know there's some people saying cut Vernon. He was a horrible acquisition. We could use that money to get another pass rusher. But there's been reports, I think it was Mary Kay Cabot last week said it. Zach Jackson also suggested it on The Athletic that Vernon's spot on this roster isn't guaranteed unless he takes a pay cut. And, they're saying he could be cut. And I'm thinking if he gets cut, he might actually make that money back on the open market just because of so many pass rushers available. Jack, when you look at Vernon, would you keep him at the number now? Would you try to restructure the contract, or would you cut him? Would you try to trade him? Like, how do you see the Vernon situation unfolding?
Yeah, so if we look at his cap hit this year, it's 15.5 million. It's no dead cap or anything. So if we walked away, we're not taking anything. We save all of that money. So if we just convert that into a percentage against the 200 million salary cap this year, that comes out as 7.75%. So a good thing to do is look at other players on the market who, when they sign their deal, they got around the same percentage year on year. So here's some names in the range. You've got Hunter at 8.1, Kerrigan at 8, Clowney at 8, Dunlap at 7.6. And that's just people in the same position group as edge rusher. So can he get that money? Yeah, I think he can. And the question comes that if he can get that money, why is he taking a pay cut? You might manage to scrape, say, 2 million off, and you go, right, we're going to make it 13.5 million, but we're going to give you full guarantees. So if you get injured, something happens, you're still getting this money. We can't sort of cut, we can't move stuff around. You tie yourself in. So there is no incentive for him, unless you're going to fully guarantee the contract, that he should sign that deal. So you've got a choice. If you cut him, what are you going to do? That 15.5 million next year goes straight from his earnings on the D line straight over to Myles Garrett, because he's going to jump from about 6 million to about 18.5. So that money's already spent next year. Who are you going to sign on a 1-year deal for 15.5 million and get similar production? I would say you just keep the guy. By all means, scout out there and look for a trade. And there might be a trade that you really like and you can get a deal done. One name that floated just straight off the top of my head last time on here was the idea of maybe going after an OJ Howard. But there'll be players out there that you might scout around. But in a year's time, if he has a good year, you're getting probably a fourth round comp pick back. So you don't want to throw away a fourth round pick, and he's going to produce. And also, the other thing to consider, who else is in the room? We've got Myles Garrett, Porter Gustin, Chad Thomas. Chad Thomas is probably getting cut or traded. Are you really telling me you're going to go into next season after you cut Vernon with Myles Garrett and Porter Gustin as your two starting edge rushers? You've got to be able to replace a player before you go, oh, let's get rid of him. Because the theory sounds great around it, but you've got to look at what that means. Porter Gustin cannot be a 16-game starter on the defensive end.
Absolutely not. I think what it is the narrative, and it's being driven by the media, of course, is that, Vernon wasn't productive. You look at his stat sheet, wasn't that all that great. He was hurt half the year. There's no way he should be making that money. I mean, if you dive into the stats, he was productive. He was getting pressure, and then Myles Garrett was capping it off and getting sacks. I mean, yeah, Vernon's box score didn't tell the tale, but, Vernon can play. Is he worth among the top pass rushers? Probably not, but, for 2020, I mean, it's worth having him on the roster because, like you said, behind Myles Garrett, there is nobody that you could say, yeah, that guy can definitely generate pressure on the opposite side of Myles Garrett and get after the quarterback. Olivier Vernon can do that. Can he do it consistently? Maybe not. Can he stay healthy? Maybe not, but it's worth keeping him on the roster at least for 2020.
Yeah, to be fair, he consistently got pressure. It was just the sacks that he just doesn't get. And to be honest, I don't care about sacks. I think PFF put the question out there and said, if we convert sacks from this sort of number of did he get 4, 5, 10, and then if we change that number and called it sack percentage, so on the percentage of pass rushing snaps, how often did he get a sack? We're arguing over like less than 1%. And you're suddenly going, oh, this player's better than that player because he's let's say 0.6% versus 0.7%. And you're saying that is an impact on a season. And in sacks, it's an awful statistic. It doesn't replicate year on year. Half of them, I remember Chad Thomas, people going, hey, he's got a sack. What happened was Myles Garrett flushed him out the pocket and the quarterback just ran straight into Chad Thomas. You can't suddenly go, Chad Thomas has done an amazing thing. He got a sack, because not all sacks are created equal. So I think Vernon's production's fine. The box score might not look okay in terms of sacks, but in terms of pressures and other stuff, generally pretty good. But it just comes down to where do you replace that? I didn't like the trade at the time because there was the injury concerns, there was the other stuff there. But you've got him, so you can't change. It's not like you can go back with a refund and phone up and go, hey, can we have Zeitler back? Let's just do a swapsies. So you're stuck with him. You may as well cash in for 1 year. Hope he has a great year. Get that 4th round pick, free up the space, move it over to Garrett. And it just gives you some time to rebuild that room because it is really, really bare. You want 4 players. We've got 1. 2 if you include Vernon. That's not good enough.
Maybe we can get Agba and Nassib back. They're both free agents.
They are 2 names I'm looking at. I think you go after one of those 2 and then you pick up a draft pick and then blend that into the room. And your 5th option, I think Paul Augustin's fine as your 5th option.
Yeah, or even Brian Cox. I mean, he showed a little bit. I mean, but he's been in the league a little longer. Maybe you go with Gustin just because he's younger. He might have more potential than Cox. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
And there's about like $1.5 million extra you've got to pay Brian Cox because he's a restricted free agent compared to Paul Augustin, who's a exclusive rights free agent off the top of my head, or he's already signed. So for me, there's not enough difference that you're talking about $1.5 million in there.
Well, if we're going with the Deep Podesta route of Moneyball, I mean, I'm sure Gustin would be the option they take. So news came out. Well, let's talk about what happened yesterday. Greg Robinson. He's still technically Browns offensive lineman, even though he will be a free agent. The Browns have no intention of re-signing him. He was arrested by the federal government on, I think it was Monday. The story broke yesterday. In El Paso, Texas, he was charged with possession of marijuana with an intention to distribute. He had 157 pounds of marijuana. I am not kidding about that. If no one's heard that story yet, that just shocks me, first of all. I guess he was traveling from California to Louisiana, but was arrested at the U.S. border in El Paso. It's kind of baffling, but then you kind of remember there was some rumblings going on about Robinson, his attitude, some of the culture in the locker room, kind of screams like a John Dorsey guy because Dorsey was the guy that brought Robinson in. It's unfortunate that this is going to be overshadow Robinson's career now. The number 2 pick back in 2014 struggled with the Rams. Was traded to the Lions, struggled there, then came to Cleveland, kind of resurrected his career, got a second contract, but fizzled out quickly. Maybe they would have brought him back as a potential backup lineman, but obviously the Browns aren't going in that direction. Jack, what was your thoughts, A, on the story, and B, on Robinson's future with the Browns or the NFL for that matter.
Yeah, so it was not. So when the story broke, there was sort of the TMZ report, and it more or less just said Greg Robinson arrested with a marijuana with intent to distribute. So we don't know anything at that point. So I see stuff on social media of like, oh, well, what size is prison cell going to be? And we're going into details. And it's like, we don't even know the details yet with this. So the first thing that I think of is, hey, if the guy doesn't get locked up, because we don't know, he could just have been in the car while this whole thing went down, then let's look at potentially doing a deal, because he was on course to get about 10 million a year. I think it'd have probably been 10 million a year, maybe 3-year deal. He could probably have got that on the market. So he was in for a payday. So the fact that this happened now is bizarre. He's blown himself out of millions and millions and millions, and he gets to spend, they're talking now up to 20 years in prison for the joy of what he did. But for me, while we didn't know the details, I'm saying, hey, if we can get a 10 million a year player, left tackle, for 3 million 1-year deal, and we've seen Kendricks was charged on federal charges, was on a roster this year, didn't play that, suspended for part of it, but did play some snaps this year. So it's not out of the question that it would have been the possibility. I just said, let's leave it on the table and see how this plays out. Some of the tweets I got were just unbelievable. Some of the stuff I was reading, it was like, well, he's already in prison. What are you saying? You should re-sign him? I'm like, whoa. I'm saying, let's not draw conclusions until a future report comes out with some details. We are in a hot take 24/7 news world where everyone's got to give an opinion as a definite within seconds. And I'm very much more of a rational guy of looking like, hey, let's see what's out there. Let's see more details. But I wouldn't rule this out if it does break in Robinson's favour. Then we got the report this morning from Schefter with sort of the police statement of it's basically all Greg Robinson's idea, apparently. And that's the moment when you go, yeah, I'm out. So, no, who knows what's going to happen. It's going to be an intriguing case to follow. And just to find out why. Because why is the big question. It's when you're on the cusp of a massive payday, then there's no reason to do what you did. So it will be intriguing. It's going to be one of those stories that I'll be following that trial just for pure interest to find out why.
Yeah, we definitely live in a hot take society, and some people do not want to let the facts come out and let everything, the process, play itself out. It's all immediately like, he's stupid, get rid of him, throw him in jail, blah blah blah. I mean, it's just how it is. I mean, and it is unfortunate, like you said. He probably would have got a decent contract because the offensive tackle market is bad. I mean, and I could be wrong. The fact that DJ Humphries got $15 million a year from Arizona shocked me because Arizona's line was bad last year. I know Kyler's running around trying to make plays and stuff, but I mean, that dude had no protection, and they just gave one of his tackles $15 million a year. I mean, Robinson probably would have got a decent amount, just maybe on a 1-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal. And like you said, he just threw it all away. And it will be fascinating to see why. I do think it's a little ridiculous that he's facing 20 years, even though marijuana still technically is an illegal drug in this country, despite numerous states legalizing it. Ohio has medical marijuana. The CBA is probably the new CBA is probably going to lower the punishment on marijuana. But still, you do the crime, you're going to have to do the time. I don't think he'll get 20 years. I'm sure there'll be a plea deal of some kind. But it's unfortunate because, he's shown flashes of talent. He never lived up to the hype, but he's still a decent offensive tackle. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, he had a pretty good, probably one of his best years as a pro last year, even though despite the struggles in 2019.
Yeah, he just had a solid year. It was nothing great. I think it was sort of around the 67 range on PFF, which just puts him above average, is probably a bit too much. But he was on course to be the number one left tackle prospect in free agency, from what I could see. You've got Costanzo, who's retiring or going back. Is it Whitworth, the Rams left tackle? He's retiring or going back, and he said he wants to go back. You start looking at the list, and the rest they're all either going back or retiring. And there was a real possibility he would be the number one player by the time we got to free agency, left unavailable. And that's why he goes and gets paid. It is a position where there's no quality usually left by the time you get to that position. And so I said, hey, you've got a guy that is solid. He can play. And I've always been of the opinion you never want to draft a rookie and go, whatever happens, you're guaranteed. You're our starter. We've got nothing else. So if you went into the season with, say, Greg Robinson, or even if you find someone else on the left and Lamb on the right, you've got 2 tackles that can play. And then you draft 2 tackles, one at 10, one in day 2. You're suddenly set for the future. And if one of those tackles don't develop the speed you hope, and you never draft based on what a player's going to do in week 1. Because if you draft on what a player's going to do in week 1, your draft's not going to be very good. You've got to look at that bigger picture, and you just then let them battle it out. Let those 2 draft picks fight as hard as they can, and when they beat out a Greg Robinson or a Kendall Lamb, you know they're going to be at a decent standard. So that was sort of the aim, and I still think it is the aim. I reckon they'll try find someone at left tackle, but finding sort of a $3 million 1-year deal, that's going to be tough. You might find something where you have to put it over 2 years, bit of guaranteed slips into year 2. But no, I definitely think we'll bring someone in just as an option, because if you go into the draft and you've got 1 tackle on your books and Chris Hubbard, you're not in a good place.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the offensive tackle market shakes out. I know, was it today, Jake Trotter mentioned that Jack Conklin's going to be on the radar for the Browns. He's a right tackle, though. You know, the left tackle would still obviously fill a void. But if G.J. Humphreys got $15 million a year, I can only imagine what Conklin's going to get on the open market, because he's pretty decent. He's still relatively young. Like, a team's going to have to shell out some serious dough for him.
We are going to see a massive deal, and it's a position group that continues to go up and up. You had obviously Nate Solder, then you had Trent Brown, and we're continuing to just see names roll out. And as a position group, it's one when I looked at sort of predicting Batonio's contract, is we're just seeing it continually rise as teams sort of go, actually, we want to invest in this. You rarely get the value on the back end is the one thing to be careful of, because usually they don't continue to perform. But just looking at what Over the Cap predicts, they're looking at a 5-year, $14 million a year for Conklin. So it's a big deal. Sort of $70 million, $34 million guaranteed. That is going to be no easy amount of money to stomach. So it's going to be intriguing what the Browns want to go ahead and do. I would say you're better waiting and going and grabbing someone in the draft. But it wouldn't surprise me. You've got Conklin, you've got Brian Bulaga. They're 2 names that you potentially go in at right tackle. I would say save the money. There's other position groups, as we talked about, linebacker, safety, that I think you can get you can get someone that can come in and do a solid job that you're really, really happy with, and you haven't had to overpay for it.
Yeah, definitely. We'll dive in more to the free agent prospects here in the coming weeks on the pod for sure. Some more news from the Browns came out today. Jarvis Landry actually underwent the hip surgery. He talked about it at the Pro Bowl and during Super Bowl media week that he was not going to get it. And then I guess it flared back up competing in the Pro Bowl. Obviously, he stole the show in the dodgeball competition. And then he caught, I think it was like 4 or 5 balls in the Pro Bowl game. But then he said, like, it started flaring up. He probably should have got the surgery. And then on the 4th, he got the surgery, announced it on Instagram this morning. He'll be out for quite some time. You won't see him at OTAs or the mini camp, but they said he'll be back sometime around training camp and preseason. Jack, are you kind of upset that he pushed off the surgery and that it had to flare up in an all-star game or even a dodgeball competition? Or are you glad that he finally decided to get the surgery and then is focused on getting ready now for the 2020 season?
It's a bit of frustration, really, that if he thought he needed the surgery, get it done really early. And if you're in a position where you're like, well, I'm not 100%, don't be going to the Pro Bowl. It's almost, it feels a bit like greed in a way of, oh, I want to go to the Pro Bowl. Oh, I want to say I've been there. He's done it before. It's put the team first in that aspect. And I know after the season where there was a lot of division in between the dressing room, the coaching staff, that, hey, you just want to go out there and celebrate with some mates and have that fun aspect. If your health's not right, the key thing is next season, because this is probably going to be the final season he'll ever get to play with OBJ. You want to go out on a high, because one of those players probably not making the season after, or both together, just because of cap constraints. So you've got a massive thing to go out there and have that. And I'm sure they're going to have incredible fun playing together next season, but make the most of it. And as well, you're battling for a spot, because if one of them two get moved on the next season, whoever has the better year next season, if Jarvis misses a summer camp and then is slow off the gate, whereas OBJ might come out with a bang, got his surgery and stuff done really early, then suddenly you're on the fringes of the team and you get moved on because OBJ's come back 100% and really driving forward. So it's one that I'd rather he got it done early. If there is any question, by all means, he's done the right thing and got it done, rather than gone, oh, I think we'll get there, and then we get around camp time and then he's like, oh yeah, I need to go do it now. So it's not an ideal situation, but it's not the end of the world.
Exactly. Yeah, I do think it's silly that, he pushed it off. Then once he played in the Pro Bowl, he was like, yeah, this needs to get fixed. I mean, why would you even play in the Pro Bowl if you're already dealing with a bad hip? You could have made it a lot worse, but I'm glad he did, decide to finally get it done. He's already a couple weeks into rehab and, getting back 100%. I'm not worried about him missing OTAs in camp, though, and all that, and like the beginning of camp. He seems to have a good chemistry down with Baker Mayfield for the most part. They played together for pretty much a season and a half, almost 2 seasons. I'm more worried about, the chemistry between OBJ and Baker. Like, that needs to improve this offseason. And it's actually going to be a good thing for whoever's behind OBJ and Landry, because they're going to get more reps from OTAs, mini camp, the start of training camp. Like, if it's Damian Radley, let's just say right now, hypothetically, Kadero Hodge, whoever they bring in free agency or the draft, they're going to be able to get their timing down and the chemistry with Baker to where that whole wide receiver room is going to be hopefully on point by the time we get to training camp. And then you're going to be able to insert a guy like Jarvis Landry, who hopefully can become that automatic guy that Rashard Higgins was before everything ended in that situation with Hollywood.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough one for other people in that room behind those two wide receivers. Just looking at Vikings last year, they've got the second most use of 2 wide receiver sets behind the Eagles. Was it a question of injuries and roster makeup that Stefanski didn't feel like going all in on using more wide receivers? Or was it that's what he likes as a scheme, of throwing lots of other stuff in there, whether it's more running backs, more tight ends, a fullback? So it's going to be really interesting to see what he does, because we might not need the depth that you've got across there. The average team in the NFL carries 5.7 wide receivers. We might be one of those teams carrying 5.
So the last big Browns topic that we'll discuss here is, Myles Garrett was reinstated relatively quickly after the Super Bowl. I think it was about 8-9 days ago. There's the stuff with Mason Rudolph and the Steelers. We're not even going to dive into that. But the day he was reinstated, Jack, you dropped a fantastic article over at thedogland.com. And if anybody hasn't checked it, I will throw a link into the or retweet it on our Twitter account at the Dogland, talking about a potential extension. Myles is eligible, as he was a 2017 first round pick. After year 3, he is eligible for an extension. Jack, you broke it down. You put together a contract, talked about the signing bonus, roster bonus, like the whole details. And you said this was your first time you actually put something together like this. So I'll let you have the floor, break down the contract, and talk about, And actually, because there's a new CBA, talk about how that might shake things out for him potentially in a new contract.
Yeah. So the first round edge rusher getting a second deal after their third year isn't something that happens regularly. We have to go back to JJ Watt as the last player, and he only got that deal, I believe it's 2 days before the season began. So this might be something that draws out over the whole off season and is done quite late on. You're probably not going to see it this side of free agency and draft. It's going to come right on the tail end. So if it does happen, that's probably the time of year you're looking out for. The salary cap's going up. That's what the CBA's telling us. We're probably looking at 48%. So the split is 47% at the moment. 48 is where it's going. And then they're going to add a 0.5% on when the 17th game comes in, which is probably about 2 to 3 years away. So obviously the increase in cap will have a knock-on impact of probably need to round the numbers up slightly because you just need to be prepared for that. Either Myles will go, I'm going to wait another year until we see what that impact is with the cap and we know the details, or you just sign it and get it done. Because that jump it's a serious amount of money. If the cap potentially moves from, let's say, 200 million to 215, 218, that's a large amount of money. When you're talking about sort of a deal that is, say, 13% of that, over 6 years, it's a sizable. You're talking about 10 million roughly, so it's not so for change. So first, it's looking at the comparable deals. You've got Khalil Mack, Aaron Donald, JJ Watt, Von Miller. I'd say they're the 4 players as defensive line superstars most similar to what you would consider Myles Garrett to be. And so in terms of contract, we're looking at 6 years. All of them got 6 years added on. So that's 6 years on top of the current structure. So he's got his 4th year, he's got his 5th year. We're talking 6 more added on top of that. And some people have said, I'll give him a 3-year. It's just not happening. It's going to be 6 years. There might be a variation 1 year either side of that, but I'd work on the basis it's going to be 6 because when the amounts of years are set, you generally get other people follow. And then the question comes in, how much is it going to cost? So Khalil Mack has the biggest deal so far at 13.3% of the cap as an average per year on the year that you sign the deal. So that's basically your measuring stick. And if we look at that, just doing that deal this year, we're looking at 159 million over those 6 years. And all I'm going to do is add a little bit extra just because of that, the cap going up and being prepared. So I've just moved it from 159 million to 164 million. So that's the number. That's what I'd expect if it was done this off season, how much they're going to need to pay Myles Garrett. And I'd get it done now. You're going to keep him. The earlier you pay him, the cheaper the deal is. And then here comes some questions on how do you do it? How do you style it? Signing bonus versus roster bonus. So with a signing bonus, they can get the money all up front and then you can split it over the first 5 years. So say it's a 50 million signing bonus. That's going to be 10 million on the cap each of the next 5 years, which is one way of doing it. Or we look at what happened with Jimmy Garoppolo. So with Jimmy Garoppolo, they put about, I think it was an extra 28 million straight in as a roster bonus in year 1. So the player's still getting the money up front, but rather than splitting over 5 years, that money on the cap goes straight in at year 1. And you'd ask, why would you do that? And the thing is, we've got all this cap space. So rather than sit on the cap space and bleed it out a little bit over the next 5 years, just spend nearly all of it in one go and put that all through. And that'd be a way for me, because then all you're going to do is lower those future cap years and save money on the back end. And then it's the decision between blending the deal and just a pure extension. You could keep him sort of next year, I think it's 9.7, and then 5th year option around 18.5, and then suddenly you jump to 27.3 a year. Or you go, actually, let's take all 8 of those years and blend them in together and get a much cheaper cap number that I believe is around 23 million a year. which is a lot cheaper. So suddenly you're looking at roughly an 8-year, 23 million a year deal rather than 2 cheap years and then 27 million a year. So there's different ways you can play it. And then I drew up what I thought the contract is. So go and look at it. I've gone into detail on roster bonus, on signing bonus, on an option bonus, guaranteed years for injuries and other things and when they will trigger off. I then reached out to Jason Fitzgerald from Over the Cap, who's fantastic. He said the one thing that just to be careful with is I've really gone heavy with front loading that deal. He said it's probably too much front loaded, so look at moving some of that back, so it's not quite as heavy. But he said that there is stuff in there that it's a perfectly workable deal. The one thing that the cap, with it being the final year of a CBA, you'll hear talk about the 30% rule, unless I believe it's this week the players vote and then it's passed. But the 30% rule basically means if you take out the signing bonus, the salary from year one, as you go through the years, cannot exceed 30%. So say the first year's salary is 10 million. Year two, the most that can be is 13. So no signing bonus impact in that. We're just talking about base salary. And that is then just a level bounce across them. But no, it was an interesting exercise, and it's one that no doubt I'll be repeating next year as we talk about Baker and where that contract stacks. But no, it's certainly, I would say go have a look. But be in mind that guaranteed salary is going to come down slightly and probably some more go into the signing bonus instead.
Yeah, I mean, it is fantastic stuff. And while you were talking, I went and looked at like average salaries, and if the 27.3 million per year number, I'm looking at it, he would be the 9th highest paid player in the league as of right now, and that's not going into effect. Obviously other free agent deals are going to go down, and he would be the highest paid defensive player by about 4 million over Khalil Mack. So I mean, it's going to be a significant deal. Myles Garrett's going to get his money. He deserves that money. I will be interested to see how Andrew Berry and Chris Cooper, who is the Browns cap guy, structures the deal, how it'll shake out for the cap, not only for the immediate future but the long-term future, because Myles is one of our cornerstones. He's one of our building blocks. He deserves that money, but it's going to be interesting to see with the growing cap how they're going to structure everything. You said this isn't a deal we should be expecting here in the next few weeks. You would think this would be a deal that gets done closer to maybe the beginning of the season or sometime over the summer?
Yeah, so I think it will come right on the tail end. So they'll get sort of everything out of the way, maybe around training camp if they want to do it this year. It might be the feeling that, hey, they want to wait another year. I would get the deal done just because you're going to do it. So unless you're thinking, do we look at trading him off like they did with Khalil Mack, which, hey, I'm not opposed to, because edge rusher is a hard position to show value. And as we saw from the Ravens, coverage wins over pass rush. You can scheme up a pass rush. You can't really scheme over coverage. So there is that option, obviously, long term, that you can go, hey, we'll flip him for 2 first-round picks and we'll do some other stuff. But if you're going to get the deal done and you've decided in the building you are getting that deal done, the earlier the better. But I would say I've had questions coming in for, what do you think this person's contract looks like? What do you think that person's contract is? And here's how I do it, and anyone sitting at home can go and do it themselves. And to be fair, some of you guys will be better than me, because you'll be able to look around the league and go, this is where that player benchmarks in. The first thing is go to Over the Cap and then click on their feature, which is contract history, and then that will give you all the active contracts and all the historical contracts. And what you've got to do is just go through the active contracts. I generally tend to ignore the other ones, so the ones they mark in green, and just go, where do I see this player stacking in, and find 2-3 players and go, right, that's the right mix for where that player's going to sit. So if you're looking at, say, what's Chubb's going to cost, I'm looking at around where Lev Bell is and going, right, that's sort of a similar deal. And then you can take that percentage at cap average per year as percentage of cap at time of signing, and then they've got their inflated average per year. So if we look at Khalil Mack signed for 13.3, but that was back in 2018. So we inflate that for the current cap, we're looking at 26.5 a year. So it's about moving that old number to the new number, because quite frankly, dollar values, if you're looking a year ahead in the future, they're irrelevant. The cap's going to keep going up, and dollar just isn't a good measuring stick. Because when people were contacting me, they were like, "Oh, this is 10 million more than anyone else is getting." I just said, don't look at the numbers. Don't ever look at dollar values for comparing deals unless it's in the same year. Flip it to a percentage, and then you can really then compare. It doesn't matter if it was 3 years ago. You're still looking at that benchmark. So by all means, anyone with any questions, tweet at me. DMs are open. I'm happy to answer them. And I went through and predicted 4 or 5 other players and where they come in. So it's certainly something anyone can do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, looking at, it's an on Browns thing, but you're looking at Russell Wilson, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz. Those were the 3 quarterbacks that got big contracts. And now you're looking at Mahomes and Dak Prescott. I'm sure they're looking at those numbers and thinking, like, we're definitely going to get more than them. Let's look at the numbers. Let's see what we can get. Obviously, Russell Wilson's the highest paid guy at $35 million. Mahomes is going to top that, and then Dak's going to try to top maybe Mahomes. It's just a matter of who's going to get done first. I would think Dak gets done first, and then Mahomes is probably waiting for who I want to trump him. Like, I'm waiting for him to set the market, then I'm going to trump that and I'm going to set the market. So it's really fascinating. I might try to dive into this myself and try to see what I could come up with. And I'm already looking forward to next offseason when you break down Baker, maybe Denzel Ward, and then there's the Nick Chubb thing, which I'm sure you're going to set some people off with how you feel like that one will shake out.
So here's some numbers, because someone did tweet me a list of names and asked me to come out with the numbers, and this is average per year at time of signing. So they will move because markets move. So as you said, Mahomes is going to reset the quarterback market. Zach Ertz and Kelsey are going to reset the tight end market. But just as of today, if I'm benchmarking, Garrett, 13.3% based on the Mac deal, 6-year deal. Mayfield, I'm looking at 17.8%, 4-year deal based off Goff's deal. We look at Ward, 8%, 5-year deal, looking at Howard's deal as sort of a benchmark. Chubb, 7%, 4-year deal, that's benchmarked off Bell. And then Njoku, it's tough because I think the market's going to move, so I went quite high on the end. I went 6%, 5-year deal based on the Reed deal. But that's one where when the market moves, everything then moves with it. So the challenge always comes in with is that benchmarking. Benchmarking is the only tough bit in the process. The rest is just simple maths of what is the percentage times it by the cap. So no, it's one that anyone can do at home, and that's when you start dropping in those questions. You start adding up the pieces, and suddenly you're going, we can't afford all these players. Who's the ones that you don't give the deal to? And that's when the fun, the opinions, and everything starts rolling. But I would say it's always worth just throwing the numbers in and having a test for yourself, have a play. And then suddenly when someone's saying, well, you can't afford all this, you can sort of see where it comes together. And you can sit there and you play GM and go, well, I'm going to get rid of this person. Why are you getting rid of that person? We can't afford them. And then someone goes, oh, but we've got 50 million in cap space. And not when you start paying all of these guys. So it was fun having loads of high picks. The check is now coming.
And that's when Jack's mentions get flooded with people saying he's wrong. And then when it happens, he takes his victory lap.
Hey, I'm not opposed to a victory lap. I'm not opposed.
We know. We've seen you had your day on New Year's Eve when Dorsey got canned.
Hey, open the champagne. People said, oh, you brought champagne for New Year's. I said, no, I got this one out special.
Before we get on out of here real quick, the CBA, as you've mentioned it several times, it looks like we're heading towards a new CBA deal. The owners not all the owners voted, which is very interesting, but they agreed on their part of the collective bargaining agreement. It's going to the players now. The players will vote on Friday, the player reps. And for those that want to know, Jarvis Landry is the Browns player rep. They will vote, and then if they approve, then it'll go to the entire list of players in the National Football League. So we could be heading towards a new CBA, which is going to be great because that would mark 10 years of peaceful labor negotiations. Some of the key points that have been leaked out already by Adam Schefter, 17-game season, which will be coming down the pipeline in a couple years. Expanded playoffs. We're already at 6 teams, so they would add a team to each conference. Only one bye week, which I think one bye team. So hypothetically this year it would have been Kansas City and San Francisco, the Super Bowl teams. Like you said, a spike in the player revenue. They would go from 47% to eventually 48.5%. This was the interesting one, Jack. I want your take on it. It says players with existing contracts that stretch into 17 game seasons would have their deal to account for. Each player in a situation would receive a raise commensurate with one game check based on their negotiated per game rate, but that amount would not exceed $250,000 per season. I seen somebody mention if you make over $4 million per year, you're not going to get a significant 17th game check. And I seen some players are already questioning that. And so this might not be done. I know a lot of people are thinking it's going to get done. If that's the case, I could see the players pushing this out longer. It's very weird that the owners are trying to get this done rather quickly. Seems like there's something fishy there.
I think it's one that it will get pushed through and fine because Jason Fitzgerald said it's 208 players that are impacted by that. So what it's more or less saying is we'll take your current salary and we're going to divide that by 17 under the current format because you've got 16 games plus a bye week, which they do get paid for. And then we're going to basically give you an extra 17th on that final week. So the players will still get paid for it. But it doesn't sort of give a player that's on 10 million a year as base salary. And I think this is only the P5 base salary that we're including. So any extra money you earn as a signing bonus or anything like that won't be added. And these are just going to be new deals, old deals in there. So it's going to be interesting to see how they bring that in. I don't think it will cause too much issue. You might see some teams just give players new deals that cover that money, and it might be more on a per team basis rather than a done by the NFL just with their sort of rule. And that wouldn't surprise me if teams just go, look, we respect you as a player. You're going to miss out on 500,000 by this change. We're just going to give you that 500,000. So that might be what happens. I think this will go through without a hiccup. It's going to be interesting to see when the details start coming out. It sounds like a big increase in minimum salary right at the bottom of the league. So that's obviously going to appeal to the masses. And you've got to think that once it gets through the union rep vote that just needs 2/3 to pass it, the actual final vote, which is players, is just a majority. So 50 plus 1. And if you're increasing that base salary, that's I think it's something crazy, like it's over half the players in the league. So that's going to appeal to them. So I think this goes through without a hiccup. And I'm looking forward to it. There's people said, oh, I don't like this about it, I don't like that about it. It is semantics. Should the players' union have got more? Yeah, they should. I don't think they're particularly good at negotiating and pushing a deal. But then at the same time, it's something crazy the amount of money they would need to sit out a year. And if you've got a player and the average career is less than 3 years, not many of those players can go, well, I'm going to give up a third of my career to sit out so someone in the future can benefit that isn't me. So I think there was always going to be a deal done. Anyone who was sort of scaremongering, oh, we need to go all in because the deal might not get done, they were just chatting nonsense. It was always that case from the start. I said it all along. There's no way you get all of these players 200 million times 32 just left on the table going, no, we're all right. It was never going to not go a year. And as well, the owners, they want the TV money. They want all the other stuff. So no, I'm really looking forward to it. A new CBA, the big impact it's going to get is some more interesting names are going to hit free agency. Because currently, where it's the final year, every team's allowed a franchise tag and a transition tag. So that's going to disappear. All of these rules, like the 30% rule, they're all going to start disappearing if that deal's done, which means there's a more chance of players hitting free agency, which we like to see because we're in a buyer's market. We're not selling. We're not trying to keep hold of players this year. So the more players out there, the more other people are bidding, and it gives us other opportunities.
Yeah, the one of the positives that I like that I seen was retired players. The pension's going to go up, and that includes the pre-free agency guys. So guys like Bernie Kosar, Jim Brown, some of the Browns legends, guys that we've seen struggling. The NFL is going to help them more, and I think that's good, especially recent concussion history. The lawsuit that had to go down there, the fact that they're going to take care of the players of the past. I think that's a great step in the right direction. Before we get on out, real quick take, what's your thoughts on them adding a 17th game and also expanding the playoffs?
So the 17th game, I'm not as excited about because, to be fair, I don't think it matters that much in the grand scheme of it. But hey, it's extra money. It's another week of football. I ain't complaining. I'm going to enjoy it. I like the extra playoff game. I think you make the end of seasons a lot more exciting because suddenly the old days of, we're one of the top two teams, everything's fine, is gone because winning your conference is now massive. You've then added in another team at the bottom, but the best thing it does is suddenly there's lots more thought and process into the difference between 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is a lot more important. The old days of it was like, well, we've basically got a fair crack of the whip. There was one year the Rams just gave up in the final week. They could have, I think, gone from 4th to 3rd and just said, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to sit there and relax. And suddenly when you're going, right, by going from 4th to 3rd, that has massive impacts on who you're playing in the next round and other things like that. We're going to see a lot more interesting games towards the end of the season, which is good because the last thing we want is you get to sort of week 14 and half the league is already packed up and gone home. So, yeah, more competition, the better. And it's 2 games. People saying, this is going to ruin careers and other stuff. It's just nonsense. I don't think it matters in terms of that. And no, good luck. Give me more excitement. Give me more drama. And in terms of, they might not be great games every year, but you're going to have a lot more teams fighting to get in. And it really brings that massive advantage. You win your conference, you're going to be in a really good position to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, definitely. And the one positive, only 3 preseason games. They're cutting out a preseason game finally. I mean, those preseason games are brutal to watch. I mean, it gets boring. Shout out to the guys that fight for the roster spots in those games, but it's unwatchable football. You watch the starters, and then after that, it's boring at that point. So I'm glad they're cutting down to 3 preseason games. Hopefully at some point they cut down to just 2 and do some joint practices. Those seem to be really fun. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see how this CBA all shakes out. That wraps up this episode of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. Jack, go ahead and plug your Twitter, plug anything you got upcoming, plug all your work, man.
Yeah, so I'm working on a massive piece, and I don't know which form it's going to get released on how we're going to do it. It might be something that we drip out over months. I'm literally deep diving into the entire roster. I'm having literally a think and plan on all 53 roster spots. What am I going to do? And I'm almost writing just a Bible on each one and how I want to build it from my 3rd position in the QB room to what I'm going to do with a linebacker and then what impact that has over the next 3 years. So I'm doing that. I'm just sat there on the draft one with the the PFF data and stuff. It's done. I just need to write it up and sort of come to some conclusions. That I'm going to save till much nearer the draft. I'll probably drop that a week or two before the draft. But no, there's odd bits and pieces. I'm working with these guys, having great fun doing it. But yeah, follow me on Twitter. It's at Jack Duffin. DMs are open. Any questions, cap related or roster building, happy to answer them. But no, thank you very much for having me on. Always happy to come chat Browns.
Yeah, thank you as always for coming on. Like Jack said, he is working with us over at thedogland.com. Definitely check out his Myles Garrett article that we talked about on here. The roster cuts piece he did a few weeks ago. Jack does some great work. I mean, he takes the time. He does a lot of detail. He's good at what he does. And we're happy to have him at the Dogland. So definitely check out our website. Follow me on Twitter at Jack McCurry08. Follow Anthony at Anthony Joki, Joki. Follow the Dogland at the Dogland on Twitter. And as always, as we get on out of here, go Browns.
Go Browns.